What is first thought that runs through your mind when you see Everson Griffen post on Instagram that he is not coming back to Minnesota?
Some disappointment. I mean, because I just think, you know, this team's obviously lost a number of pieces. They're going to have to really get lucky in the draft and find some of those, those gems. And I just think, if you bring Everson back, then that is continuity. And I think the thing that this franchise has wrestled with over the last couple of years was a sense of continuity. And when you lose a piece like that, it's just hard to replace. It's hard to replace the Diggs, hard to replace Griffin, obviously. And, I guess I am beginning to understand that this team is going in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. And now the draft, they could do a great job in the draft. Who knows if they get a bunch of picks for Anthony Harris. But I do think that, Spillman's going to have to do a great job evaluating the talent here in April to try to boost this roster, because they've lost some pieces where you go, you're not going to fulfill that role with a 22-year-old in the second or third round. It's just not going to happen.
So my buddy Andrew Kramer from the Star Tribune always puts things carefully and well, I think. And he tweeted this: "Can't imagine it's gone exactly as planned so far when it comes to this Vikings offseason." And I think I think that perfectly sums it up with Griffin not staying. I mean, at the Combine, Mike Zimmer talked as if it was a foregone conclusion that Everson Griffen was going to be back. And at that point, he was essentially saying, and I guess the Vikings would have been, if they had brought him back, they would have been saying, to paraphrase LL Cool J, like, don't call it a rebuild, right?
Yeah,
and,
I like that. Look at you being all 90s hip hop.
Yeah. Oh,
that's 80s, actually. Like
the 80s I'm a little tougher on, but I know that one. So I wasn't around for most of the 80s. Yeah. So, but that was the vibe that you got was, yeah, we're going to have to replace pieces. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, but we've been developing some players and everything else. And if we still have the bones of this thing, if we still have Everson Griffen and Danielle Hunter and Harrison Smith, and if we bring back Anthony Harris, then yeah, you know what? You can replace Trey Waynes. You could replace Xavier Rhodes. Those two guys didn't really play all that well last year anyway. But now you're talking about a completely different group of human beings on the defensive side. And for a long time, that was something that they talked about as why they were so good, is they all knew Zimmer's defense up and down. And there were the same guys at the beginning of 2015 were all on the roster that started the playoff game in Santa Clara against the 49ers. So, that is all completely changed just in a matter of days. And in a world right now where you look around and go, is this real life? I mean, it's got to feel that way for whoever walks into that Vikings locker room whenever they're allowed back in, of looking over to that defensive side and going, is this real life? Who are these people?
Well, and I think that's the thing, Coller, is for the first time, it feels like this will be a different team. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to look like the team we're accustomed to seeing. They have to find a way to really hit a home run in the draft. I think with the Stephon Diggs trade, what happened was a lot of people said, well, look at what they got in return. I said that. And I think if you're going to lose a guy who doesn't want to be here, which I'm fine with the trade from that aspect, it was clear that Diggs didn't want to be in Minneapolis. And I don't know how you take that situation into 2020. I don't know how you remedy that. So what they got in return was great. But I think the thing that maybe was missing is, you've got to hit the lottery there, though. You've got to make the right decisions to really build up this team, considering what you've lost. I read the piece that you wrote about. I think they were as of last week, Pro Football Focus said a difference of like 1.5 wins compared to the roster they have, which, I mean, that's you sitting at home versus you getting into the playoffs. And now you lose a Griffin and you lose pieces that were reliable. Mm-hmm. And if this team has struggled with anything under Mike Zimmer, it's maintaining reliable options on both sides of the ball. So I think that's where you get more concerned. You had enough struggles when you did have those guys you could count on consistently. What do you look like without them?
Right, because
this is putting more pressure on Kirk Cousins to just be great. And I think a lot of people are concerned as to whether or not he's going to be able to make up the gap for what they've lost.
Well, right now they have no guards either. So it's not just on the defensive side of the ball, but you make a good point about the lack of continuity on the offensive side has been a part of the thing that has defined Zimmer's era here, is that you haven't had a consistent quarterback only once in back-to-back years, and that's Kirk Cousins the last 2 years has been their starting quarterback. Offensive coordinators coming in and out, and Thielen and Diggs were the reliable on offense that made everybody better. And now you only have one half of that on the offensive side. And on the defensive side, you're forced to completely revamp that thing. The only things you have left, and I'll count Anthony Harris for now, are your 2 safeties, your 2 linebackers, and 1 edge rusher that you know what you're going to get for next year, because I don't count Mike Hughes or Jaleel Johnson or Armon Watts. Like, yeah, they were on the roster, but we don't know what they can do yet. And, it ran through my mind too about how much had to go right for the Minnesota Vikings to be as good as they were with a lot of these players. So think about
very good point. Very good point.
Think about Everson Griffen. I mean, he's a 4th round pick who was a rotational pass rusher. And Zimmer deserves credit for this, came in and said, no, you're going to be a full-time guy, and turned him into one of the best defensive ends in the NFL for a long period of time. But how often does that happen, that a 4th-round guy on his second contract suddenly becomes a consistent Pro Bowler? Almost never. How often does it happen even that a late first-round pick for even 2 or 3 years becomes one of the best, if not the best, cornerback in the NFL? Even at safety, if they move on from Anthony Harris, undrafted guy who becomes one of the top safeties. I mean, some of this is development. Some of it is a very smart front office when it comes to finding players. Some of it is dumb luck. Stephon Diggs in the 5th round is dumb luck. You can't tell me otherwise, because if you knew anything about it, you would have drafted him in the 2nd round or the 1st round. So, are
they arrogant now off that dumb luck, you think? I mean, is this become a sense of, and maybe arrogance is the wrong word, overconfidence, that because you've hit the lottery once or maybe multiple times, considering some of the guys you identified, that, hey, with the draft assets you have now, you can do it again and you can plug in some of those holes? I mean, is that a part of what we've witnessed here over the last couple of weeks?
So, I've been thinking about this, of what does it say that Everson Griffen is leaving? I mean, I don't blame any man for trying to get the most money he can possibly get on the free agent market, but he's also part of a couple of players who have decided to go when maybe they could have found a way to stay. Mackenzie Alexander, Jaron Kearse, and of course, Stephon Diggs is at the top of that list. He easily could have stayed and been paid handily and been a star player, and he forced his way out, essentially. So you have players that are kind of working their way out of this situation, and what does that say about either their view on the long term, or what they thought the atmosphere was in Minnesota now, which has drastically changed from my feeling from 2017, really since midway through 2018, there has been a ton of tension in that building. I even want to say that it started against the Buffalo Bills when they completely botched that game at home, that the pressure just ramped up. So where every tight game, it felt like they were on edge, right? And feeling like this is the biggest game and this is going to determine all of our futures. And then hot seat conversations and fired offensive coordinators and all those things start to come up. So the atmosphere has very, very much changed. And I wonder if that has some guys saying, you know what, like if you're Diggs, I signed a team-friendly contract to stay here because I thought we were going to be a Super Bowl contender for the next few years. We kind of weren't really, and now we're definitely not going to be, so we'll catch you next time. And I wonder if it's that way with Griffen, where he's looking at this and going, well, none of my friends who built a number 1 defense here years ago, they're not here anymore. So I should really just try to be a mercenary for somebody that actually does have a chance to win.
Well, and what's the fine print there? Do I trust that I have a quarterback who's going to lead us beyond to sort of the promised land? He's going to get us those extra wins. It's fascinating, the reports out of Tampa Bay already, that guys are begging to go to Tampa Bay and want to be a part of Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. And that's what winning quarterbacks do. They attract that level of talent because guys go, you know what? Even if I'm paid below market value, I think I can win there. And that's been what the Patriots have been able to do and all these great franchises. The Vikings are in this really, really weird place where they're not really attracting that guy. They're not really attracting that guy who is going to give you more than what you're paying him because he wants to be part of a winning franchise. And I think that was even clear in the first 2 years of Kirk Cousins. But now it almost seems like the guys that you thought were just always going to be there and that you had to fill in sort of the other pieces, but your core was intact. Now it seems like the core is falling apart. And why is that? It's because if you're Griffen and your Diggs, you don't believe you've got a guy at that position that can really lead you into the playoffs on a deep playoff run. And that's what it comes down to. To me, a level of trust in the operation and the guy who runs the operation on the field, at least, is Kirk Cousins. And I think that's troubling. Adam Thielen was hurt last year. Does he get healthy this year? You hope so. But you're going to need guys to, even if they play at Pro Bowl levels, you're still missing so much production from what you've lost. And then you're left with a quarterback that is pretty good sometimes, not all the times, not enough. Doesn't make up for that 1.5 games that you're obviously losing right now, according to Pro Football Focus. So it just feels like they're in this weird place, man. And I wonder this, Collar, if you don't beat the Saints and you don't advance to the NFC Championship game, how does that affect expectations? Where are we sitting right now in terms of what we anticipated? Because that, to me, that one play, as much as it's the miracle in Minneapolis, in many ways it's to the Vikings' detriment because it created a certain expectation that they haven't been able to meet. And that, to me, is why we're in the situation we're looking at right now.
I think that is 100% correct. Because think about it in an alternate reality where the Vikings go into New Orleans and let's say they play an average Vikings game that's a big one, where they're kind of in it and kind of not, and then they lose at the end. They lead a drive, so they only lose by 7 instead of 14 with time expiring, right? That's what they usually do on the road in big games. That one was different, though they blew a lead, and we always sort of, don't look at that fact that they did blow a lead. And if they had not won a coin toss, maybe we're talking about a very different situation because we would have focused a ton on how they blew the lead and how they let it go and how Cousins couldn't score extra points and everything else if they lose a coin toss. So life is funny like that. Yeah. I think that they make a change. I think that they make a coaching change, possibly a front office change. And I think the mentality of the team at that point would be, it's over. Our run is over. And now we have to tear it down. And now we have to completely rebuild it. And I'm only somewhat convinced that they would even sign Kirk Cousins to a contract extension at that point. If you had brought in a new front office and a new head coach after they lost, hypothetically, in New Orleans, do they say, okay, first order of business, extend Kirk Cousins? I'm not sure that they do. I think they would have wanted to see it play out. And now the Cousins extension, without Griffen coming back and feeling like your defense won't possibly be where it was over the last few years, now it just feels weird that Kirk Cousins is extended because that was a very much, no, we're still going for it type of mode. And Griffen leaving is, okay, but you don't have any players to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the homeowner that built this amazing deck, and just spent so much time, a whole summer, making it look perfect. But then you go in the house and there are all these repairs that need to be made. Like that, the Vikings are in this really weird place because you'd rather either be in like real rebuild mode or chasing a championship mode. Being somewhere in the middle is a really, really terrible place to be in the NFL, and it seems like that's where they sit. And here's what we've learned in the last couple weeks. And as much as I could make fun of the DeAndre Hopkins trade, I mean that was ridiculous. Obviously, Stephon Diggs gets traded for a package of picks. What we're finding out in the last couple weeks is more and more teams are betting on their quarterbacks. Yes, the Texans didn't get anything in return, anything you would expect them to get in return for Hopkins. But that's in part because the Texans see Deshaun Watson as a guy who's going to turn anybody they have into a great receiver. Now, I don't think that's a great calculation, but that's who they're investing in. Yeah. That's who Tampa Bay is investing in. If we get that position right, nothing else matters because that position is by far the most important position on the field. Look at all these running backs. Look, Melvin Gordon wanted $40, $50 million a year ago. He just got 13 guaranteed from the Broncos, right? Like we already seen this with running backs, but now you're seeing it with other guys at skilled positions that the quarterback has become so skillful and so important that you invest there first and foremost. You do whatever you have to do to get that right, and you feel like you can fill in around him. The Vikings are in this weird place where they just lost a critical piece that was obviously connected to Kirk Cousins' success, and now you're asking Cousins to do more in this weird in between space. Are they a contender? Are they a team that should just be focusing on rebuilding for the future? But what's the future with Kirk Cousins? I just think it is fascinating to me, man, that we went through a stretch where we thought we kind of knew where this team was headed.
Yes.
Going into New Orleans. Like, it felt like they beat New Orleans. We kind of got a sense of what we're going to be looking at here for the next couple of years, that the candle's still lit, right? That the fire's still burning a little bit. Now, I don't know where this team is going, Colin. Where are they going? Like, what would you tell a fan right now who's going, what's the goal this year? Who is this team, and what's a realistic goal for what they can achieve in 2020?
Now, if they had not signed Cousins to a contract extension, that would have been easy. We're looking toward the future. And that would have been exciting in a lot of ways, I think, because Hunter is still extremely young.
Great.
And even if you sign Harris to a contract extension, he'll be good for a few years. You could draft a couple of rookie corners. Let's watch them grow. A rookie left tackle. Let's see what this guy can do. And even if you sign Dalvin Cook to an extension, the numbers on running backs generally point to them being good till they're like 28. So he can even be good through the rebuild. Let's even just say under that scenario, still young, doesn't have that much mileage on his body. So things to get excited about. A rookie wide receiver. Here comes a receiver or two. And who's going to develop? Who's going to be the Diggs that comes out of nowhere? That would be kind of exciting. And the most exciting thing in sports, who's your next quarterback, would be really fun for fans. In fact, the week where we talked about Jalen Hurts, everybody was debating Jalen Hurts, who probably won't even be good, but at least it was sort of a fun conversation of, hey, maybe you draft this guy and then see what he is the first year. When they signed Cousins to the extension, that brought everybody back to reality of, oh, okay, so they still view this in that window to win, but then everyone leaves on defense. So now what side are you on here? Are you rebuilding but with Cousins as your quarterback? Because that just doesn't really add up. Not that he's ancient or anything. It's just that you know exactly what you have there. Usually when you rebuild, what you're aiming for is to have a quarterback who steps in on that rookie contract that everybody wants. And now we see a team like Cleveland spending more money. They spent a bunch last year. They're spending even more this year to build up that roster around Baker Mayfield. And that's exciting for them on the rookie contract. Mahomes on the rookie contract, they're able to pay Sammy Watkins 14 times what he was worth when he came out in free agency, and he makes some big plays for them. But that's exciting because then you could spend all that, to build the rest of the roster and watch the draft picks grow. But with your quarterback already set and getting paid a lot of money, including a $45 million cap hit in 2020, it makes it extremely difficult to sell fans on one side or the other. And that's why we've come on and said, the 2021 plan is actually a good one. And the 2020 plan where you sign a bunch of savvy free agents to fill in these little holes, like, okay, you get a cheap nose guard, not a $27 million one. You get a good cornerback who's kind of up and coming that maybe someone overlooked in free agency, and you really show your brilliance there. I could be sold on that. But I don't know which way they think that they're going. Today seems to signify the direction was picked for you. But Cousins is under contract already.
And that's the last thing you want. What you just said there, Collar, you want to be able to decide where you're going. And Griffen and Diggs took that away from you. Mm-hmm. They essentially said, no, we're not going to let you all dictate our fate. And Anthony Harris could do the same thing. We're going to tell you where we're headed. And you just don't know. You just don't know. They seem like they're kind of wandering in the wilderness of free agency right now, and that's a bad place to be. I mean, you look at teams in the past couple of years. San Francisco did a lot in the draft in the offseason to go from being a 4-12 team to a Super Bowl team, added some key pieces. Obviously, getting a number one pick like Nick Bosa helps. You look at what the Colts have done. Went from being one of the worst teams in terms of protecting Andrew Luck to Andrew Luck having his best season before he retired, getting Quentin Nelson, the safety was Darius Leonard, a lot of guys who came in and just changed that team. So you can go into an offseason and get the right pieces, like you're talking about, get the right young talent in the draft and you can change the trajectory of your team. But most of those teams were close to the bottom. I mean, things were bad. I think the year before Andrew Luck comes back, Jacoby Brissett, I believe, is sacked 50 times or something like that. Like they're just they're ridiculous things that happen. So it's easy to look at those situations and go, how much worse could it get? You're 4-12 in San Fran. Everything looks amazing when you add some pieces and suddenly you're a winning team. That's not the Vikings. Like, this is a playoff team. Like, this is a team that we expect to be in the playoffs, to make a run, to compete. So now, being in that situation, having to rely on a couple of free agents here and there, some rookie talent, it's hard to see how they get better. And that is where I don't think anyone expected the team to be at this point in late March. You thought that maybe they'd go into the draft going, yeah, I don't know if they get significantly better, Collar, but you expect them to, at a minimum, maybe stay at the same level. Then you lose Diggs, and now you lose Griffin, and it's going, this could be going back to year one under Kirk Cousins or worse, because you're missing some of the key pieces that were necessary even to go 8-7-1. It's just a wild situation, man, that this team has found itself in yet again.
I mean, considering I'll throw another 90s reference at you. It was all good just a week ago.
It was all good.
And then
just
now,
a week ago.
how much change? And that goes for our entire world, but also the Minnesota Vikings defense and the rest of the roster.